Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Could you imagine a land believed to hold the solution to Britain's poverty, overpopulation, and even prostitution?
It's quite a thought, isn't it? And that's just one of the many fascinating threads we'll untangle today as we dive deep into Becoming Aotearoa by Michael Belgrave.
It's a history book, by the way. So if you're into history, like me, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives just like this one. You can find a link to the book in the description, by the way.
It's a really engaging read. Belgrave does a fantastic job of revealing those often overlooked aspects of New Zealand's history.
Exactly. It's not just dates and names. This book uncovers some surprising connections, like how the extinction of giant birds actually influenced Maori encounters with Europeans.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of environmental history and social history, even in those early chapters of New Zealand's story.
Okay, so let's paint a picture of pre-European New Zealand. What was life like back then?
Well, New Zealand was already inhabited for centuries by Polynesian settlers. Their arrival, however, had a considerable impact on the environment.
Yeah, the book talks about the extinction of the moa, the giant flightless bird, and the giant eagle, known as the puakai. It's hard to fathom, isn't it? Giant birds just roaming around.
It really underscores the impact humans can have on their surroundings, even in those early societies.
It makes you think, how did those early experiences shape how Maori engaged with the European world later on?
That's a great question. Maori culture had already adapted to a changing environment. It fostered resilience and resourcefulness, qualities that would prove crucial in their interactions with Europeans.
Then comes Captain James Cook. That feels like a turning point in the story.
Definitely. Cook's voyages put New Zealand on the map for Europeans. But they also transformed Maori perceptions of the world beyond their shores.
There's a fascinating figure in the book, Tupeia, the Polynesian navigator who sailed with Cook. Sounds like he played a key role in bridging the communication gap between the two cultures.
Tupaia's story is so important. He acted as a cultural mediator. It shows that communication is much more than just language. You need cultural understanding.
Absolutely. And speaking of complex cultural interactions, the book delves into early missionary work. It's a more nuanced story than you might expect.
It is. You see this blend of cultural exchange and religious conversion, but also some unintended consequences. For instance, some Maoris saw Christianity as a strategic advantage.
Advantage how?
Well, it could offer them European support, particularly during those intertribal conflicts. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white.
So much gray area. Now, with European interest in New Zealand growing, how did the idea of colonizing the country take shape?
That's where Edward Gibbon Wakefield comes into play. He had this vision of a better Britain, you see, through systematic colonization of New Zealand.
So solving Britain's problems by sending people to New Zealand.
Exactly. He believed colonization could address all sorts of issues: poverty, overpopulation, even things like prostitution.
Wow, that's quite the ambitious plan. But what was it actually like for those early settlers? Did this utopian vision pan out?
Not exactly. Those early settlers faced some harsh realities. Life in New Zealand was far from the idyllic picture Wakefield had painted.
So grand plans clashing with the realities of survival. That sounds like a recipe for tension.
And that tension eventually led to the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840.
The agreement that was supposed to create peaceful coexistence between Maori and the British Crown.
Yes, but the Treaty of Waitangi, while intended as a partnership, ultimately became a story of misinterpretations. Maori and British authorities understood its terms in fundamentally different ways.
Which, of course, set the stage for future conflict. The book describes Maori communities having to adapt to these new technologies and navigate a rapidly changing world.
One of the biggest changes was the introduction of muskets in the 1820s and 1830s. This period of the Musket Wars saw Maori communities adapt and incorporate this new technology.
And then you had the Northern Wars of the 1840s. The book specifically mentions Hone Hake, who chopped down the British flagstaff. What a bold move. What was behind that?
Hake's actions were certainly acts of defiance. But to understand them fully, you need to understand the Maori perspective on sovereignty and their resistance to colonial encroachment.
Right, so there's more to it than meets the eye. Then you have Governor George Grey, who seemed to have a rather unique approach to dealing with these conflicts.
He attempted a blend of military force and cultural understanding. He recognized the need to engage with Maori on their terms, though that didn't always translate into fairness.
And of course, there's the impact of land confiscation on Maori communities.
That land confiscation had a devastating impact on Maori communities, both socially and economically, and the effects of that dispossession continue to this day.
A powerful reminder of how historical injustices cast long shadows. So how did New Zealand's social and economic development unfold against this backdrop of conflict and upheaval? You had those New Zealand company settlements trying to establish themselves.
Those settlements, despite the many challenges they faced, did eventually succeed in establishing themselves, and they played a vital role in shaping New Zealand's future.
The book describes these settlements as having a surprisingly young population, with people from all different backgrounds. It seems like New Zealand from the beginning was a melting pot of cultures.
And as those settlements grew, we see the emergence of industries like gold mining, sheep farming, and manufacturing. These industries would go on to shape New Zealand's economy.
A period of rapid growth.
Mhm.
But I imagine it wasn't without its challenges.
You're right. Alongside this economic progress, the late 19th century saw a rise in poverty, crime, and social inequality.
The downside of progress, it seems.
And this period of progress and growing pains ultimately set the stage for New Zealand's journey toward becoming a nation.
Becoming Aotearoa. It's a fascinating story, and we've only just scratched the surface. We'll be back with part 2 of our deep dive into becoming Aotearoa soon, so make sure you're subscribed and stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into becoming Aotearoa. Last time we left off with New Zealand on the cusp of nationhood, stepping onto the world stage, but with the 20th century looming, full of changes and challenges.
And boy, were there shakeups. I mean, the Great Depression, World War II, those were global events that reshaped everything. How did they impact New Zealand?
They had a profound impact, both socially and economically. The Great Depression hit New Zealand particularly hard, leading to hardship and a search for solutions.
The book mentions the rise of the Labour Party during this time and their idea of a welfare state. It seems like a pretty big shift in New Zealand's history.
It was a major shift. The Labour Party, with their focus on social responsibility, wanted to create a welfare state that would fundamentally change the relationship between the government and its people.
It's interesting how New Zealand was at the forefront of these social welfare policies, something we often associate more with Scandinavian countries today. What were some of the key aspects of this welfare state, and how did it affect New Zealand society?
The welfare state in New Zealand had wide-ranging social programs, things like old age pensions, unemployment benefits, and universal health care, all aimed at creating a safety net for everyone, reducing poverty and inequality.
A very different approach from the laissez-faire attitude prevalent in many other parts of the world at the time. Were there challenges in implementing these policies?
Of course, no system is perfect. While the welfare state had success in reducing hardship and promoting equality, it also faced criticisms. Some argued that it created dependency, others worried about costs and bureaucracy.
It shows that even well-intentioned policies can have unintended consequences. The book also highlights new voices emerging during this time, challenging traditional values, particularly from Māori and women.
Absolutely. It was time of social awakening, a push for greater equality. Māori activists were challenging the injustices stemming from colonization, while women were advocating for equal rights and opportunities. These movements played a key role in reshaping New Zealand's social and political landscape.
Inspiring to see these groups pushing for change. Alongside these social and cultural shifts, New Zealand was also experiencing significant demographic changes, wasn't it? The book discusses urbanization and migration.
Definitely. Cities were growing rapidly, and immigration from various parts of the world brought new cultural influences and perspectives. This further diversified New Zealand, adding more layers to its evolving national identity.
So many social, economic, and cultural changes happening all at once. It seems like a real test of New Zealand's adaptability. Did all this lay the groundwork for the even more dramatic shifts of the late 20th century?
It did. These changes formed the complex backdrop for the rise of neoliberalism in the 1970s and 1980s. New Zealand, like many countries at that time, was dealing with economic challenges, social tensions, and uncertainty about its future direction. This created fertile ground for new ideological approaches.
Neoliberalism is a term we hear often but can be hard to grasp. What does it mean for New Zealand in terms of actual policies?
In New Zealand, neoliberalism resulted in some pretty radical economic reforms. Both labor and national governments implemented these reforms, focusing on deregulation, privatization, and shrinking the role of the state in the economy. These changes affected almost every sector imaginable, from agriculture and finance to education and healthcare.
Those are some sweeping changes. What were the driving forces behind these reforms, and how did the public react?
The reforms were fueled by this belief in free markets and individual responsibility as the keys to economic growth. Proponents argued that they would lead to a more efficient and competitive economy, attract foreign investment, and ultimately benefit all New Zealanders.
I'm guessing not everyone was on board with such a radical departure from the welfare state model.
You're absolutely right. The reforms sparked controversy. Critics argued that they would increase inequality, dismantle the social safety net, and weaken New Zealand's sense of community. There were protests across the country as people voiced concerns about these policies.
Sounds like a period of intense debate and social upheaval. What does the book say about the long-term effects of these neoliberal reforms? Did they achieve their goals?
The long-term consequences are still being debated today. Some argue that they did lead to economic growth and a more competitive economy, while others point to rising inequality, social fragmentation, and a decline in public services as evidence of their negative impacts.
A mixed bag, then, with both positives and negatives. Makes you consider the trade-offs of any significant societal change. How did New Zealand reconcile these economic changes with its commitment to social justice and a more equitable society?
That's a crucial point. The book highlights the tension between economic liberalism and social justice during this period. It explores how New Zealand tried to balance economic growth with social well-being.
It seems like New Zealand was going through a period of introspection, coming to terms with its past, its values, and its vision for the future.
And as we move into the 21st century, we see New Zealand wrestling with these themes of identity, reconciliation, and its place in a world that's rapidly transforming. But we'll delve deeper into those themes in part 3 of our deep dive.
Welcome back. As we wrap up this deep dive into becoming Aotearoa, I'm struck by how well it connects New Zealand's past, present, and future aspirations.
It's really powerful how the book tackles tough questions about identity, justice, and what it means to be a global citizen in the 21st century.
One of the big themes that keeps coming up in these last chapters is reconciliation, especially related to the Treaty of Waitangi. It feels like finding a path towards reconciliation has been a long and complex journey for New Zealand.
It has been a long and complex process. The book acknowledges that the Treaty of Waitangi settlement process, while a step forward, is still debated. It's an intricate issue with deep historical roots and ongoing consequences.
It seems like there's always this tension between acknowledging past wrongs and finding ways to move forward together. How can a nation balance those two things?
It requires careful consideration and a balanced approach. Becoming Aotearoa emphasizes the need to listen to different perspectives, understand the nuances of what happened, and accept that reconciliation isn't a one-time event, but a constant process.
Sounds like a lot of work is being done at a societal level to address those historical injustices. Can you give us some examples of reconciliation efforts highlighted in the book?
Sure. The book discusses a variety of initiatives, like returning confiscated lands to Maori tribes, revitalizing the Maori language, and recognizing Maori cultural practices more broadly. These are just a few examples of the multifaceted approach New Zealand is taking towards reconciliation.
It's good to see those efforts being made to address past wrongs and build a more just and equal society. It's not just about apologies or money. It's about a real shift in mindset, a commitment to a future where everyone feels valued.
Absolutely. And that's where national identity plays a crucial role, wouldn't you say? How does a country with such a complex history define itself in the 21st century? How does it reconcile its past with its hopes for a more inclusive future?
This book really digs into that idea of a constantly evolving national identity, challenging us to think beyond rigid definitions and embrace the fluid, complex reality of what it means to be a New Zealander today.
Right. The book rejects the idea of a single, fixed national identity. Instead, it proposes that New Zealand's identity is fluid and multifaceted, encompassing its diverse population, its bicultural history, and its aspirations for a future built on respect, inclusivity, and social justice.
That's a powerful idea. National identity is something you create together, not something you just inherit. It requires dialogue, understanding, and bridging those differences.
And that creation involves acknowledging and embracing diversity, having honest conversations about the past, and working together towards a future where everyone belongs.
It's a message that applies far beyond New Zealand. In our increasingly interconnected and diverse world, we all need to navigate those complexities and create societies that are both just and inclusive.
Exactly. That's where global citizenship comes in. Becoming Aotearoa explores how New Zealand is facing global issues like climate change, international relations, and its role in a multipolar world. It highlights New Zealand's efforts to be heard on the world stage and contribute to a more peaceful, sustainable, and fair world.
It feels like New Zealand is forging its own path, one that builds on its history, its values, and its commitment to social justice. As we finish up this deep dive, what key takeaways would you want our listeners to ponder?
For me, the book emphasizes that history isn't just facts and dates. It's a living narrative that shapes who we are and how we view the world. It also calls us to action. We all have a part to play in shaping the future, whether it's through dialogue about reconciliation, challenging outdated ideas about national identity, or working towards a more just and sustainable world.
I love that history as a call to action. It's not just looking back, but using what we've learned to create a better future. So to wrap up our exploration of becoming Aotearoa, we want to leave you with this question. What does becoming mean to you? How are you shaping your own understanding of the world? And what role do you want to play in creating a more just and equitable future? Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through New Zealand's history. We hope you found it insightful and engaging. If you did, please share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what other deep dives you'd like us to take on. Until next time, keep exploring.